Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into one of the quietest places in all of England. You're not visiting a haunted house or some ghost-ridden crypt. No, you're arriving at a place so silent, so completely removed from everything living, that even the birds hesitate to chirp here. Wharram Percy, a village that no longer breathes, yet somehow still hums with the leftover tension of lives once lived. The wind carries no names here, only broken stones and soft, moss-covered trails that forgot what footsteps feel like. And honestly, if you had to spend a whole winter here without central heating, no Wi-Fi, no snacks, and definitely no indoor plumbing, you wouldn't make it past the second night. Trust me. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far back in time we can travel together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just stepped off a modern path and onto a trail that wasn't meant for shoes like yours. The dirt beneath your feet. Yeah, that is not just dirt. It's centuries of farming, of boots and bare heels, of ruts and blood spills, all compacted into something we now call heritage soil. There's a stile in front of you, one of those wooden fences with a step over. You climb it slowly. Your fingers graze the grain of the top beam. Smooth, polished, not by sandpaper, but by time. Thousands of hands before yours. Some carrying bread. Some carrying babies. Some carrying nothing but grief. The grass on the other side is too soft. Suspiciously soft. Like a place where people used to walk in rows, side by side. A village green, perhaps, though nothing green stays long when no one stays to water it. You're not in a tourist site. There's no ticket booth. Just you and what's left behind. The path winds into a shallow basin, a kind of natural bowl in the landscape. That's where they built it. That's where you are now. Wharram Percy. If the name sounds more like a B-list Hogwarts character than a real place, you're not wrong. But once it was just home, a handful of stone cottages, a church, a spring, a place where cows lowed in the morning mist, and children tried to escape their chores by hiding in haylofts. You pass the remnants of those homes. The outlines are clear if you know where to look. Walls now only 2 stones high. Hearths that haven't seen fire since Henry VIII had all his hair. And the church, you see it now. Off to the right, standing tall like it forgot it was supposed to die too. Its tower is cracked but proud, like an old man in a coat that no longer fits. The air smells like nothing. Not decay, not earth, just absence. A dry, weightless absence, like the smell of a closed book. You feel a tickle at your ankle, just grass, probably. But in a place like this, even grass feels like memory. They say the village was never big. A few dozen people at most, maybe more during harvest. It wasn't famous. No battles. No kings. Just farmers. Which, of course, makes it all the more extraordinary that you're here now. Because something about this place refused to be completely erased. Not quite. Not yet. You walk past the remains of what once might have been a barn. The stones are arranged too neatly to be natural, too broken to be useful. Imagine animals here, snorting and shifting, waiting to be milked. Now imagine that same space, 100 years later, being used as shelter by a traveler lost in fog. And now you sit down on a rock that someone once used as a doorstep. It's comfortable, like it was made for this. Like it was waiting for someone with sore legs and too many questions. From here, you can see the entire basin. You imagine how the morning fog must have filled it like a bowl. How the bells of the church once called everyone to gather. But there's no one now, just wind. And the faint suggestion of a song that might have been sung here once. Now, here's the strange part. For centuries, no one really cared about Wharram Percy. It wasn't until the mid-1900s that archaeologists started poking around. And what they found? Layers. Not just dirt and pottery shards, but layers of life. As if the village had tried to bury its own heart and hope no one would dig it up again. One historian called Wharram, England's most studied village no one lives in. Kind of poetic, isn't it? Like being famous for being forgotten. You walk further now, past what used to be the village pond. It's a depression now, dry and cracked. But frogs once croaked here, and lovers once met after curfew. There's a rumor, don't worry, nothing supernatural, that a ring was found here, centuries old, engraved with two names no one recognizes. Maybe a love story, or maybe just laundry day gone wrong. And that's the thing about places like this. They don't shout their stories. They whisper, softly, like a breeze through broken window frames. There's a narrow trail that curves up the hill behind the church. As you follow it, your legs begin to ache, not from effort, but from a kind of time-traveling empathy. As if your body remembers the toll of fetching water from the spring, or walking home after market with a torn satchel and half a turnip. You reach the crest and look down. The whole village below you. Every ghost of every house and every unlived dream. It's not eerie. It's not tragic. It's just paused. Like someone hit the mute button on time. And it stayed that way. No one ever truly said goodbye to Wharram Percy. They just stopped showing up. Fields grew over. Doors rotted off. Maps stopped including it. And the church, bless its stubborn bones, just kept standing. So now it's you sitting on the edge of what was, listening for what never quite stopped. And somewhere, beneath your feet, lies a footprint that looks an awful lot like yours. You ease yourself down the slope, leaving behind the hilltop and its silent view, following a trail that curves toward the church, the same church that, like a forgotten book, stands waiting to be reopened. Its walls are still intact, mostly. The roof is long gone, and weeds have claimed the altar. But the stones? The stones remember. Every one of them seems to lean just slightly toward you, like old friends trying to whisper something important through cracked mortar. Your steps are slow, not just from fatigue, but from reverence. There's something about this place that asks you to tread softly, to listen, to understand. The church is oddly elegant in its decay. Ivy curls up through the windows, its green tendrils replacing the stained glass that once filtered sunlight into sacred color. You pause at the threshold, half expecting a voice to say, "Take off your shoes. You're on holy ground." But there's no one to say it. Just the wind and the faint hush of memory brushing past your ears. You step inside. The floor is uneven, half dirt, half stone. There's a depression near the center where the congregation once gathered, and at the far end, what remains of the chancel. You can still see the outline of where the pews once were. You imagine them filled. Children twitching with boredom, old men nodding off, women mouthing prayers as if they could sculpt salvation from silence. The bell tower looms above, a bony finger pointing skyward. It used to ring every Sunday, and on feast days, and weddings, and funerals, especially funerals, the final echo of a life, cast into the hills to remind everyone else they were still here, still mortal. Some say the bell rang one last time before it was removed. Others claim it fell and shattered during a storm, sending shards of bronze into the nave like a divine tantrum. Historians still debate that, by the way. But either way, the bell is gone, and the silence it left behind feels far too perfect to disturb. You sit on what used to be the back wall, a crumbled ledge where altar boys once leaned, giggling behind their sleeves. You let your hands rest on the cold stone and close your eyes. For a second, you can almost hear it. A sermon in Old English, half mumbled, half sung, rising into rafters that no longer exist. and then quiet again. You notice something just beyond the altar, an archway partially collapsed, leading to a small side chamber. You duck your head and step through. It's cooler in here, shaded. The kind of space where secrets used to wait. Maybe a sacristy, maybe a priest's study, or maybe just a room to store worn-out hymnals and old regrets. You run your fingers along the stone walls. Someone carved initials here, faint, worn by centuries, but still there. A W and a P. Could be Wharram Percy, or two lovers, or two brothers who weren't supposed to be inside this room, sneaking bread and whispering stories about saints with swords and flying dragons. Whatever it meant, no one bothered to erase it. And maybe that's the point. You step outside again, blinking against the soft daylight. The clouds are thick now, dulling everything to a blue-gray hush. It's the kind of light that feels like dusk, even at noon. Across the path, you see the old graveyard, and you hesitate. It's not spooky, not really, but it's heavy. The air is heavier here. The grass grows slower. The stones are worn to the point of anonymity. Most names lost, dates blurred, epitaphs swallowed by lichen. But you walk in anyway, because this is where Wharram Percy speaks the loudest. Not through screams or moans, through stillness, through absence. You kneel beside one grave, a small one, child-sized. There's no name left on the stone, just a faint groove. Could have been a lamb carved there once. Or a cross. Now it looks like a question mark. You don't cry, but your breath hitches a little. You don't know who they were. No one does. But the fact that they were once loved enough to be buried here, that matters. And here's the thing. When archaeologists began excavating Wharram Percy in the 1950s, they found something strange about the churchyard. Some of the bones had cut marks, careful ones, not from violence, but from defleshing, not a massacre, not cannibalism, something older, ritualistic, maybe even reverent. Experts still argue about that. Maybe it was a way to prepare the dead for the next life. Maybe it was an act of protection to keep something from coming back. Or maybe, just maybe, someone didn't want to say goodbye. You step away, giving the past its privacy. Your feet find the main path again, the one that curves past the church and toward the village's edge. You notice something strange. The way the grass grows differently here, thinner, as if it remembers too many boots and hooves and wheels passing over it. The path used to lead somewhere, a market maybe, or another village, but now it leads only to fields, empty, quiet, waiting. You pause and look back at the church. From this angle, it looks smaller, as if the land has slowly swallowed it in its sleep. And maybe that's what happened. Maybe Wharram Percy wasn't abandoned. Maybe it was tucked in, carefully, lovingly, like a child being put to bed. You follow the curve of the overgrown path, shoes brushing against tall stalks of grass that lean in like curious spectators. The air has changed, still soft, still cool, but there's a hint of something older, not rot, not mold, just use, wornness, as if the earth here has been walked on so many times it forgot how to rest. The trail leads to a small rise, barely a hill, really more of a suggestion. But once you crest it, the land below opens like a storybook page. Lines of earth, faint outlines, parallel ridges that dip and rise like the ribs of a sleeping beast. You blink. At first it just looks like fields, but then you see it. Pathways, paths layered over older paths, footprints turned to furrows. What you're looking at is the memory of motion. These are the lanes of Wharram Percy, not the main road you walked earlier. These are internal, domestic, tiny connections from cottage to cottage, barn to granary, oven to doorstep. And somehow, you can almost see them, the villagers, A woman walks quickly, holding up her skirts, face flushed from baking too long. A boy runs barefoot after a chicken, yelling something in Middle English that probably meant, "Get back here, dinner." An old man limps behind a cart, wheels creaking, muttering at a donkey that's smarter than him. They're gone, all of them, but the ground still cradles their rhythm. You take a few steps forward and feel the subtle dip of a path trodden smooth by hundreds of years. Curves left, then right, brushing past what used to be someone's front door. The house is gone, of course, just a rectangle of stone bases and weeds, but the shape is clear. A square hearth once dominated the center of the room. No chimney, just a smoke hole in the roof. The floor was likely dirt, maybe rushes, maybe a few rough planks if they were lucky. No furniture that survived, but there would have been a low table, a bench, a cradle. You crouch, pressing your fingers into the earth where a fire once warmed someone's toes. And then you hear it. Nothing supernatural, just a bird maybe, or the way the wind flutes through the hollows of the ruined walls. But it feels like a voice, a hum, a vibration in the air, almost like breath. You rise slowly and glance back along the path. This house wasn't alone. It was part of a web, connected by lanes worn deep into the soil. Proper village. And here's where it gets interesting. Archaeologists discovered that Wharram Percy didn't grow like most settlements. It didn't expand chaotically. It evolved, gradually, intelligently. The layout reveals shifts over time, cottage foundations over earlier ones, new structures nudged into old alignments, as if each generation was carefully dancing with the ghosts of the last. Some homes, they found, were repurposed more than once. One structure had 3 distinct hearths, each in a different place, each from a different era. The scholars still debate why. Was it migration within the village? Was it social hierarchy shifting? Or just plain bad chimney design? You pass another ruin, this one wider, possibly 2 rooms, maybe a weaver's house. The walls here are more substantial, and you find a curious groove in the stone, maybe a window ledge, or maybe someone's improvised shelf, once home to a wooden cross or a bowl of dried beans. And the ground nearby, slightly scorched. Archaeologists found evidence of an outdoor bread oven right about here. A dome of clay, now gone, once fed with sticks and bramble, producing loaves that smelled like safety. There's something haunting about that. Not the ghost, the ordinariness. How these people lived their entire lives within a few hundred steps. Birth, work, illness, love, and eventually a small stone-marked grave. They didn't go on holidays. They didn't start podcasts. They didn't reinvent themselves every January. They just stayed until they couldn't. You follow the path further. It leads to what may have been the village green. It's a bit of a guess, but it makes sense. The widest flat space, central enough, ringed by homesteads. Place for gatherings, for news, for laughter, for arguments about chickens trespassing on gardens. And it's here that the soil holds a story nearly lost. During one dig in the 1980s, a team uncovered dozens of children's bones near what used to be a well, not buried properly, no coffins, some wrapped in linen, some not at all. They weren't victims of violence. No trauma, no injuries, just death, quiet and inexplicable. Maybe a disease, maybe malnutrition, maybe something else entirely. No one agrees on it. But the theory that stuck, the one that makes your chest tighten now, is that these children died slowly, over months, maybe years, as the village declined, as food grew scarce, as hope became a luxury, and still the paths carried their parents back and forth each day, to tend, to bury, to try again. You pause, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because this was never a place of tragedy, not in the theatrical sense. It wasn't Pompeii. It wasn't razed by fire or flooded overnight. It just unraveled. One by one, families left. Some likely went to nearby towns. Others maybe further. Some likely died before they ever made it past the next valley. And yet, for a while, someone kept walking these lanes, sweeping these thresholds, baking that bread. You stand in the middle of the village green and turn in a slow circle. Everywhere you look, you see loss, but also presence. Like the villagers left everything behind, not because they had to, but because they thought they might come back. But no one did, except you. You linger a little longer in the village green, breathing in the stillness that has somehow become familiar. The quiet isn't empty anymore. It's layered, like wallpaper that's been painted over 100 times, each silence sitting atop another, until the whole thing hums with something ancient. Your next steps take you along a narrower path, one lined with broken stones on either side, foundations, yes, but more compact. Tighter walls, cramped corners, a bit less light. You're entering what would have been the densest cluster of homes, likely for the poorer families. Not every villager in Wharram Percy had a tidy hearth or a tidy life. And here, among the crushed thistles and tilted stones, you can feel that difference. The spaces were small, fires shared, roofs patched with whatever they could find. And beneath it all, you realize there's more than dirt. There's something beneath your feet. Bones. You're not walking over them exactly, but you're close. Archaeologists found hundreds of skeletal remains here, beneath homes, along the footpaths, in corners where no one would expect a grave. Some were buried properly, others weren't buried at all, and many showed signs of, let's call it post-mortem modification. We're not talking about simple burial rituals here. Some skeletons had been disarticulated, carefully, pieces removed, skulls placed apart from the body, and in several cases, cut marks on the bones, not hacking or violence, but precise incisions. Theories abound. Some say it was defleshing, a rare but not unknown medieval mortuary practice. Some say it was to prevent the dead from rising, the result of fear. Others insist it was simply practical, bodies handled quickly during disease or famine. Historians are still debating this. You kneel down next to one ruin, just a rectangle now, with a slight depression where a floor once sagged under generations. It was in this very spot that a partial skeleton was found, only legs and hips, the rest missing. The odd thing? There was no sign of animal activity, no digging, no grave disturbance, just a person who, one day, stopped being a person and became a mystery. You glance up at the sky. The clouds are thicker now, low and moody, like they're pressing gently on your shoulders. You pull your coat tighter, even though the wind hasn't picked up. To your left, nestled into the slope, is a larger structure. Its stones are smoother, more precisely laid. A larger footprint. This wasn't a home. This was likely the manor house, or at least what passed for one here. The lord of the manor wouldn't have lived here full-time. These rural estates were usually managed by a steward or bailiff, someone responsible for collecting rents, enforcing laws, and making sure no one stole too much barley. You approach what remains of the threshold, a flat, wide stone, once trodden by boots made of oxhide and authority. And standing there, you try to imagine him, the lord, or the steward, some man with a ledger in one hand and a cudgel in the other. He wouldn't have smiled much. Not here. Not often. He'd have had power. Real, tangible power. The power to evict, to fine, to starve a family out. But also the power to protect, to offer grain in a bad harvest, to delay collection. He was judge, boss, landlord, and sometimes executioner, depending on the century. This building would have been slightly elevated, built to overlook the valley. A reminder, visible from anywhere in the village, that someone was always watching. And here's a strange fact. In the early 1400s, a dispute over land ownership involving Wharram Percy escalated to royal attention. Letters were exchanged, names mentioned, a mess of claims and counterclaims. Took years to sort out. No one remembers the outcome, but the paperwork survived. And now, centuries later, historians pore over those faded ink lines, trying to untangle the drama. You step through what would have been the manor door. It's quiet, but the silence is different here. Not peaceful, tense. You imagine someone being punished here, not violently but publicly. An example made, maybe a man caught poaching, or a woman accused of theft. You imagine her standing here, eyes downcast, as her neighbors pretend not to look. The steward speaks. She nods, and then leaves, but doesn't come back. There's a chill in this room. You don't stay long. Outside again, you take a moment to breathe. The village seems to soften once you leave the manor's shadow. The path brightens slightly, or maybe that's just you. You follow a short trail downhill toward the village spring, a natural source that's been bubbling for centuries. You can still hear it, a soft gurgle, half hidden by tall grass and brambles. This spring was everything. Drinking water, washing, baptism, a gathering place. Somewhere near here, archaeologists found a broken wooden ladle, preserved in the mud, delicately carved, worn from use. Someone drank from it every day. Then one day they didn't, and the ladle stayed. You crouch beside the spring, still flowing, still clear, cold. You dip your fingers into it. It bites your skin with a shock of temperature, then numbs it. You wonder how many other hands have touched this same water. How many secrets were washed away here? You lie back for a moment on the grass beside it, letting the damp seep into your coat. The sky rolls above you, endless and gray. A raven calls in the distance just once and then is gone. You close your eyes. For a second, the sound of the spring becomes a voice. Not in English, not even in words, just presence. The kind that says, "You're not the first. You won't be the last. But for now, you are here. And that is enough." You rise slowly from the grass beside the spring, brushing the damp from your back. The earth clings to you for a moment, as if reluctant to let you go. You don't blame it. There's something oddly comforting about being this close to where life once pulsed. Not through grand events, but through routine, repetition, and quiet survival. As you make your way back toward the village core, your eyes fall on a stone boundary, a shallow wall running like a spine between two structures. It looks unimportant at first, just rubble. But the more you study it, the more deliberate it feels. This wasn't just a divider of land. It was a pathway, used again and again by bare feet, wooden clogs, and muddy boots, leading toward something central, something constant. You follow it, and before long, you're standing in front of a low, circular foundation, wider than the others. A different shape, different stone, and definitely a different smell. Clay, charcoal. This was the village bakehouse. You kneel beside it, placing your palm on the blackened stone. Still cold, but not lifeless. You can almost feel the echo of heat, of wood crackling, of dough rising in quiet communion. They baked bread here, not in personal ovens. Few houses could afford the firewood or the time. No, this was communal, shared, the beating heart of the village's rhythm. You imagine the schedule, who baked when, who brought the flour, who got the first loaf. Probably a pecking order, probably some tension, and definitely a few burnt crusts. A scrap of medieval parchment once described a village bakehouse as the place where fire, flour, and forgiveness must meet before noon. Sounds about right. You run your hand along the edge of what used to be the oven's outer shell. The clay's long gone, of course, but the curve remains etched into the foundation, just enough to hint at its size. And here's a little detail most people miss. On one side of the stone, hidden beneath a collapsed slab, archaeologists discovered a bone pin, likely used to tie hair back. Simple, elegant, worn smooth by years of touch. It wasn't dropped. It was placed, tucked between stones, almost ritually. Some say it was an offering. Some say it was a superstition, something to keep the bread from burning or the loaves from spoiling. Historians still argue about it. But you like to think it was a farewell. A baker's final shift, one last loaf, and then, quietly, the door left ajar and never closed again. You stand and let your eyes follow the wall line outward, imagining the people who once stood here. Elbows dusted with flour, cheeks pink from the fire, trading gossip and grains. Bread, after all, wasn't just food. It was power. Control the bakehouse and you controlled hunger. You controlled time. And you controlled who got to feel full. You step away now, drifting toward a broader patch of earth behind the bakehouse. At first glance, it's just wild grass and a few sunk stones. But if you look closely, you'll notice the pattern. This was a paddock. Small livestock, pigs, maybe goats. A few chickens. Nothing grand, but enough to keep eggs on the table, fat in the broth, and manure in the fields. The grass here is uneven, lumpy in places, like the land remembers being trampled. You can picture it. Children chasing piglets with too much enthusiasm. Farmers calling in the geese with shouts that only geese understand. And at the far end, a lean-to structure or what's left of it. A few timbers rotted into the ground. A sunken trough. You approach it, careful not to slip on the moss-covered stone. Inside the shallow depression, you find a shard of glazed pottery, greenish, flaked with age, possibly part of a bowl, or a lamp, or something more mundane like a feed scoop. But here's the curious part. It was found alongside a sheep's jawbone, still intact, still marked by the tiny notches of old-age tooth wear. The sheep had lived a long life. Too long, probably. She wasn't slaughtered young, which means she was important. A breeder? A favorite? There's no record, of course. But someone let that sheep live well past her prime. That says something. You look out across the paddock and imagine the conversations had here. About harvests, about marriages, about whether the rain would come. Not deep thoughts, just everyday ones. And somehow that makes them feel more sacred. You step away, following another faint path that loops behind the paddock and skirts the village's edge. And that's when you see it. A stone-lined pit, square and deep, set apart from the other structures. At first you think, well, but it's not. It's dry, clean, and too deliberate. This was a storage cellar, cool, shaded, partially underground, perfect for keeping grain, or beer, or secrets. You climb down carefully. The walls are mossy, but stable. The air shifts immediately, cooler, damper, smelling faintly of iron and root. You close your eyes. For a moment, you're not in 2025. You're not standing in a ruin. You're inside the storage cellar of a living village. Above you, someone's footsteps pass overhead. A woman humming as she lowers a basket on a rope. A child sneaks in behind her, swipes an apple, and gets away with it. Somewhere, someone sneezes. Someone laughs. Someone breathes. And then it all fades again. You're alone, but not really. Because here's the strange part. They never planned to leave. This wasn't a village in crisis. Not at first. There was no siege, no fire, no catastrophe. The houses weren't razed. The church wasn't desecrated. The spring didn't run dry. People just trickled away, gradually, quietly, like a tide receding. One family, then two, then seven, until eventually, someone looked around and realized they were the only one left baking bread. And that was the end of Wharram Percy. But the stories? They stayed behind. You follow the cellar's stone edge with your fingertips as you climb out. The damp has sunk into your sleeves, a chill that clings a little too long. You rub your hands together for warmth, but not just from the cold. There's a sensation building, like the village is slowly waking up around you, not from sleep, but from silence. Your boots press into the earth again, dry, uneven, laced with tangled roots that have long since claimed the edges of human order. Ahead, the land flattens out, dotted with broken stones and scattered roof tiles. You're nearing the northern end of the village, the part farthest from the church, closest to the woods. And here, in the quiet corner, stood the Lord's house. Not the manor with its books and judgments, that was earlier. This is older, before records, before anyone bothered to write names. A hall house, they think, likely timber-framed with wattle and daub walls, and a roof that whistled in the wind no matter how much thatch they packed in. What's left of it now are post holes, arranged like punctuation marks on the land, and a few foundation stones half buried in moss. But if you close your eyes and listen, you can hear the echo of something larger. You walk along the length of the space, pacing it out, 10 steps, 12, 15. It was sizable for a place like this, a sign of control, of presence. Whoever lived here wasn't just another villager. They were the villager, the one who decided where the sheep grazed, the one who approved marriages, the one who could, with a nod, change someone's winter for better or worse. You crouch at the back wall, where the hearth would have been. This was no cozy family fire. It was huge, built to heat the hall, dry the hides, boil the stews for hired hands and visiting priests. And something odd was found here. A fragment of carved stone, bearing a partial Latin inscription. No one agrees on what it said. Some think it was part of a gravestone repurposed. Others believe it was part of a religious blessing placed above the hearth. Historians still debate it, but the stone had scorch marks. Someone tried to burn it. You glance up at where the rafters would have met. Maybe that's where it started, or maybe that's where it ended, because by the 15th century, this hall was no longer occupied. Documents mention the rise of a new manor, more defensible, more modern, built further west, closer to the road. This one was left to rot. And as you stand there, listening to the invisible creak of ghost beams and dry thatch, a thought lands like a feather. Power never really leaves. It just relocates. You rise and walk behind the structure, where a narrow ditch runs parallel to the wall. It's lined with flagstones, too neat to be natural. A drain, perhaps, but also, curiously, a path. A path that leads straight to a small enclosure, barely visible beneath the overgrowth. You push aside brambles, and there it is. A circular space, walled in, secluded. A place no one mentions on the old maps. It might have been a garden, or a pen, or something else, because what was found here isn't typical. A cache of objects buried shallow, deliberately. Pewter cross, a broken comb, several shards of stained glass, and bones. Not animal, human, not a full skeleton, just a few pieces. Jaw, hand, one vertebra, too clean, too precise. No coffin, no ceremony, just tucked away in the earth like an afterthought or a warning. They weren't buried with honor, but they weren't discarded either. Which leads to the most uncomfortable theory of all. This was a punishment site, somewhere between grave and garbage, reserved for those who died with sins unspoken or too loudly spoken. No one agrees on who they were. A thief? A heretic? A woman who bled at the wrong time in the wrong way for too long? What's certain is this: they weren't allowed in the churchyard, but someone still cared enough to give them a space. You sit on the stone ring and exhale slowly. The wind has picked up. It slides down your collar like a cold suggestion. You pull your coat tight and lean back, staring at the sky. No birds, just clouds, and that faint electric hum that comes before rain. You wonder if the villagers ever sat here, late at night, speaking softly so the children wouldn't hear, about guilt, about curses, about whether the land itself was starting to turn against them. Because it wasn't just hardship that pushed Wharram Percy toward death. It was uncertainty, the sense that something had changed, quietly behind the scenes, something they couldn't see or name but could feel, in their fields, in their families, in their bones. A shift, and once that shift began, it never stopped. It just got quieter. The clouds above thicken like wool soaked in ink, hanging low enough to feel close, almost reachable. You leave the hidden enclosure behind, brushing through brambles and stepping carefully over roots that stretch like tendrils across the path. The village is beginning to blur, edges softening, outlines smudging. It's not your eyes, it's the hour. Dusk approaches, and with it, a kind of slow dissolving. But before the light fully fades, there's one more place you need to visit. You head west, past what used to be open pasture, until you reach a depression in the landscape. A shallow bowl rimmed with stones, roughly rectangular. Overgrown but unmistakable. Fish pond. Yes, a fish pond. Not for decoration. Not for lazy summer swims. This was survival. Medieval villages like Wharram Percy relied on these little pools to provide food when meat was scarce, or forbidden by the church's calendar. Fish wasn't just protein. It was a calendar anchor, a holy loophole that kept bellies full. The pond itself is dry now, its muddy floor cracked and littered with nettles. But centuries ago, it was carefully lined, stocked with carp, pike, maybe tench. Nothing glamorous, just useful. You step down into the basin, the grass parting like curtains, and imagine the waterline, the slight ripples from a dropped pebble, the smell, mud and moss, and the faint briny tang of life. A boy once stood right where you are, barefoot, holding a net, his father beside him, maybe his mother watching from the ridge. And now, just you, and a few stones too stubborn to forget where they belong. Here's something curious. Near the edge of the pond, a wooden plank was unearthed, charred on one side, split through the grain. Possibly a walkway, possibly a platform, possibly a gallows. It's only a theory. No records, no names. But the way the post holes were arranged, it doesn't look like a dock. Historians still argue over that one. You crouch near where the largest beam would have stood and let your fingers trace the edge of a long rotted socket in the ground. Could someone have died here? More likely, someone lived with the memory of it. Wharram Percy wasn't a place of justice. There was no court, no jail. But in times of famine or fear, justice becomes portable, swift, communal. You stand again and walk the perimeter of the pond. There's a slope leading up toward the fields, what used to be open strip farming, divided into long, narrow plots that look, from above, like stretched fingers across the landscape. You climb. At the crest, you pause and look back. The whole village unfolds below you in quiet gradients. The skeletal church, the collapsed bakehouse, the manor ruins, the springs shimmer, and all the paths between them like veins under skin. You realize something. This wasn't a village. It was a system, a fragile equation. Every home, every animal, every person balanced against the soil and the season and the sky. And when that balance tipped, even just slightly, it all began to unravel. A bad harvest here, a sickness there, a steward too cruel, a lord too absent. Then the Black Death. Yes, it reached here too. You might think a village this small could hide from it, that it could duck behind its hills and wait for the plague to pass. But diseases don't respect geography. Records are scarce, but the bones say enough. One site yielded more than 40 individuals in a single layer, men, women, children buried hastily side by side. No grave goods, no markers, just earth and hurry. You imagine the last woman standing in the village green, cloth over her face, watching smoke curl from a chimney that had no right still burning. And then, stillness. You sit in the grass, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the weight of it all. So much ending, and still, it didn't vanish. Because here's the twist. Wharram Percy didn't die in the 1300s, kept going. Not vibrantly, not joyfully, but it lingered. A handful of families remained. They rebuilt, married, harvested, prayed, but the village was changed. Permanently, it was no longer growing, no longer drawing life toward it. It was shrinking, slowly, elegantly, like candlelight running out of wick. By the 1500s, most of the houses were empty. The church held fewer baptisms. The fish pond dried. The manor closed its shutters. The doors warped. And even the land, the very soil, stopped pretending it was home. But not completely, because you're here now. And the earth has never quite forgotten how it once thrummed with footsteps, with voices, with breath. You remain seated on the ridge for a long while, letting your breath slow to match the rhythm of the fields. The wind moves differently up here, steadier, with fewer interruptions, like it remembers when nothing stood in its way. Below you, Wharram Percy has begun to fade into the twilight. The outlines blur. The stones melt into the grass. It's not disappearing, it's just withdrawing, like something pulling a blanket up over its shoulders. But the story isn't done yet, not even close. You rise and follow the line of the old ridge and furrow fields, a medieval agricultural method that shaped the land into long, wave-like strips, perfect for drainage. From the air, it looks like corduroy stretched across the hills. On foot, it feels like walking along the ribs of something enormous, half-buried. You try stepping from crest to crest, imagining the farmers who once followed these same curves, plowing with oxen so stubborn they made donkeys look obedient. Day after day, season after season, always turning left, always trusting the soil. Here's the thing. For centuries, these fields fed the village. And not just grain. They offered rhythm. Autumn, plowing and sowing. Winter, mending tools. Spring, lambing. Summer, haymaking. Then repeat. Everything depended on timing, on hands, on weather, and on luck. But then came a shift. Not a disaster, not a single event, just economics. See, by the late 1400s, England was falling in love with wool. Suddenly, sheep were more valuable than people. Literally, pastureland brought more profit than families ever could. And here's where Wharram Percy met its slow executioner. Enclosure. The local landowners, sensing the change in the wind and their wallets, began to convert arable fields into grazing land. Slowly at first, then aggressively. Strip fields were abandoned. Tenants were evicted. Walls were built. Some were paid to leave. Some were threatened. Some simply vanished. You crouch beside one of the furrows and let your hand glide over the grass. You can feel the shape still, the muscle memory of the land. In 1508, a document was signed. Neat Latin script, very official. It gave permission to destroy a large part of the village, to make way for sheep. And that's exactly what happened. Houses were pulled down, cottages dismantled. Even parts of the church were stripped. Timbers taken, tiles repurposed. A few families resisted, tried to stay. But what do you do when your neighbors are fences and your fields are hooves? The death of Wharram Percy wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a policy, an economic footnote, a decision made with ink and wax by men who probably never set foot here. And this is what stings the most. They didn't just abandon the village. They erased it, turned its paths into pasture, its doors into firewood, its people into ghosts with nowhere to haunt. You stand again, tracing the line of an old boundary hedge. Just a few stones remain, markers of what was once private, sacred space. And in the hedgerow itself, something glints. You kneel and find it. A metal button, domed and dimpled, likely from a coat, maybe a child's, maybe a servant's. Nothing valuable, but undeniably human. You turn it over in your palm, feeling its weight or the illusion of it, because what you're really holding isn't metal. It's proof. Proof that someone didn't just live here. They stayed long enough to lose something, and no one ever came back to pick it up. You pocket the button gently, not to keep it, just to hold it a little longer. Your thumb runs across the edge as you walk, each step pressing deeper into this layered landscape. There's a warmth in the metal now, faint but real, as if it remembers fingers, fabric, friction. You're walking through the traces now, traces of things not meant to survive, but too stubborn to vanish. You follow the old sheep track, once just a shortcut between fields, but eventually the main artery of a very different kind of village. A village not of people, but of profit. Where once stood families and gardens, now trotted sheep. Hundreds of them. Clean, plump, docile little gold mines wrapped in wool. Wharram Percy didn't die. It was converted. You pass a crumbled stone wall. Its shape curves with the hill, deliberate and careful, almost tender. This wasn't a defensive wall. This was containment, to keep things in. And in a strange twist, the sheep that replaced the villagers actually helped preserve their memory. You see, sheep don't plow. They don't build. They don't dig latrines in the wrong place and destroy archaeology. So while they chewed the grass and stomped the footpaths, they unintentionally protected the village beneath them. Like silent, woolly archivists, you crest a rise and find yourself staring down at what used to be the churchyard. The church is still partly standing, one long wall, a pointed arch, the outline of where the nave met the chancel. But the yard, that's what draws your eye now. It's fenced off gently, with a rope and a few signs warning visitors not to walk through the graves. As if time hadn't already done worse. You step to the edge and look in. The ground here is sunken, uneven, not from erosion, from bodies. Generations of them, layer upon layer of villagers buried in neat, east-facing rows. The good, the wicked, the loud, the forgotten. Some were buried in shrouds, some in wood, a few in stone-lined graves, and many, many children. In fact, Wharram Percy's cemetery revealed one of the highest proportions of juvenile remains ever found in a rural English village. Malnutrition, disease, poor sanitation, but also life was just fragile back then. Babies didn't get to plan futures. They were lucky just to see spring. You lean against the fence, watching the sun dip behind the skeletal trees. A single stone still stands, a headstone, eroded to the point of anonymity. No name, no date, just a lump of intention. And then you remember the reports. The strange ones, the ones about modified skeletons, not in the punishment pit, not in the midden heaps, right here in the churchyard. Some bodies had been tampered with after burial, skulls removed, limbs rearranged, ribs broken not by violence, but by anxiety. The kind of anxiety that comes when the living start suspecting the dead of lingering too long. Yes, anti-revenant practices, a fancy academic way of saying they thought this person might come back, so they took precautions, just in case. Historians still debate whether it was superstition or ritual or desperation. Maybe all three. You glance down at the closest plot, half expecting to see movement. Of course, there's none. Only the steady march of evening. And still you don't move. Not out of fear, out of respect. This churchyard held the last remnants of belief. Not just religious belief, but belief in place. That if you were buried here, among your kin, your story wouldn't be lost. Your bones would stay where they belonged, and your name would last longer than your breath. But names fade, and so do villages. By the late 1500s, Wharram Percy was mostly fields again. One or two structures lingered, used by shepherds or squatters. But the community, gone. The last priest reportedly left in 1527. He walked away and didn't look back. And with him, the final ember of village life winked out. You turn from the churchyard slowly, as though waking from a long dream you're reluctant to leave. The fence creaks softly behind you as the wind picks up again. No louder than a whisper, but sharp enough to remind you that even memories grow cold eventually. Still, you don't feel alone. You haven't for a while now, not because someone's watching, but because so many once were, and they left their gaze behind, stitched into every furrow, every crack in the stone. You descend the slope, following the line of the old trackway, the one that would have connected Wharram Percy to its neighboring villages. It's little more than a groove now, overgrown and uneven, but it once carried carts, feet, gossip, and grain. A road of necessity, not glory. You imagine the traffic. A priest on a donkey, a boy delivering eggs, a peddler with wooden buttons and stale gossip, and now and then a cart bearing a coffin, covered in cloth, headed for the church, and eventually for silence. It's said that in its final years, Wharram Percy became known for just two things, its wool and its emptiness. Wool because that's what replaced the villagers, and emptiness because word got around. Farmhands would pass by and say, "That's the one where the houses look at you," and they weren't wrong. The abandoned cottages, dozens of them, stood long after their owners had left. Their thatch caved in, their beams split, but the doorways, still open, still facing the road. And it's here now that you reach one of the best preserved house ruins in the village. A low rectangle of stones, maybe waist-high, enclosing what once was a home. You step over the threshold and feel a shift. The way the wind changes when you enter a ruin. It's not dramatic. It's just quieter, as if the air is holding its breath. You walk the perimeter slowly. Here a hearth. There the imprint of a window. In the far corner, what might have been a bed, or a storage bench, or a place where someone sat to cry when the barley failed. They found things here, tiny things, a child's spoon, a clasp, a bone die for playing games, and near the doorway, a shard of mirror glass. No frame, no backing, just a triangle of silvered glass, no bigger than your palm. But here's the strange part. It was placed face down, deliberately, with a flat stone over it. Why? Some say it was to trap the soul of the house, to keep it from wandering. Others say it was a superstition. Broken mirrors bring bad luck, unless buried. But others believe it was a farewell, a final glance at one's reflection, then a decision, turn it over, walk away, don't look back. Historians still argue. You sit where the hearth used to be, tucking your knees to your chest. The stones are warm from the sun's last rays, though night is creeping fast now. You try to picture the final night in this cottage. A single candle, the last embers dying in the grate, pot scraped clean, a child asleep under rags, and a parent staring at the door, knowing tomorrow they'd be gone. Not by choice, by necessity. You close your eyes and imagine that breath, that final look, that moment when they stepped into the road and became history. Not famous, not remembered, just part of the soft vanishing of the English countryside. And then you hear something no louder than a sigh. The wind again, slipping between stones like it's trying not to wake anyone. But no one's here, except you. And yet you don't feel lonely, because tonight the village remembers you back. You remain seated in the old cottage ruin as the darkness folds itself gently across the village. The last line of sun has vanished behind the hills, and now everything is bathed in soft gray, a world made of outlines and breath. The stones no longer feel cold beneath you. They feel indifferent, like they've given up waiting for people to come back. You rise slowly, stretching out your legs, your knees popping just enough to remind you that time moves forward whether villages survive or not. A little farther west lies a spot that barely gets a mention in the pamphlets. No signage, no official path, but the archaeologists know it. The locals used to avoid it, and the villagers, they had no name for it, but they all knew it was there. It was called, informally, the Hollow. You find it at the edge of a low rise, tucked between two dry stone walls. At first, it looks like just another depression in the earth. Sunken, grassy, a place where water might gather. But as you step closer, you realize something's different. The grass is too sparse, the soil is too loose, and there's something off about the quiet. You step down carefully, boots sinking just slightly, as though the ground isn't quite sure it wants to hold your weight. This was no natural hollow. It was a communal midden, a dumping ground, but not just for waste, for memories. They found things here, broken things, burned things, a child's shoe carefully cut apart, a ceramic bowl smashed, then burned, then buried, a length of rope knotted at one end, and bones, human bones, mixed with sheep, pig, dog. No patterns, no logic, just layers of life discarded in haste or fear. And strangest of all, embedded deep in the midden was a single iron key, bent, melted. No lock was ever found for it. Just that key alone, beneath a pile of everything no one wanted to keep. You crouch there now, in the center of the hollow, the silence pressing gently on your ears. You try to imagine what would bring someone to destroy the very objects they lived with. Not just throw them away, but destroy them first. Was it grief? Was it fear? Was it cleansing? You think about what people do when they're told to leave. Some pack, some run, some ritualize. Break the bowl, burn the doll, bury the lock, so that whatever was once part of this world doesn't follow into the next. You lie back on the slope of the hollow, arms stretched behind your head. The stars are beginning to appear, timid little pricks of light, uncertain in the fading blue. And for the first time since arriving, you begin to understand why this place stayed hidden so long. Wharram Percy was never really lost. It was deliberately folded away, not erased but carefully tucked under the blanket of time. The kind of forgetting that takes effort. And yet, here you are, a stranger in the hollow. The weight of someone else's history settled softly on your chest like sleep. And you realize, maybe these stories weren't meant to be told in books or classrooms or museum placards. Maybe they were meant to be whispered, late at night, when no one else is listening, when the world has gone soft at the edges, and only the stones are left to nod in agreement. You rise from the hollow with the reluctant weight of someone leaving behind a secret. Your boots press gently into the soil as you step out, careful not to disturb whatever final meaning the midden may still hold. Behind you, the shallow depression disappears into the grass, just another wrinkle in a forgotten landscape. And now the dark is fully here. Not the city kind, dotted with electric blinks and passing headlights. This is rural dark, heavy, honest, uninterrupted. It folds around you like wool dipped in ink. And for a moment, you wonder how anyone managed to live like this. Then you remember they didn't manage. They adapted. You walk slowly toward the highest point in the village, guided more by memory than vision. The ground rises gently beneath your feet, the stones becoming more scattered, more deliberate. Up here, near the crest, lies what once passed for a lookout. Not a tower, not a military post, just a small earthwork platform, probably used by the villagers to watch their sheep, track storms, and whisper suspicions about their neighbors. It gives you a view of everything. What's left of it. The collapsed bakehouse. The fish pond, now just a shadow. The church, its empty windows blinking like sockets. And the trackways, twisting out like the veins of a leaf. You sit on a stone outcrop, folding your knees to your chest, and begin to wonder what it would have been like to be the last one here. Because someone was. The village didn't vanish overnight. It wasn't swallowed by war or flood or divine punishment. It was abandoned slowly, painfully, one family at a time, one cart at a time, one goodbye whispered into the fields, never answered. And when that last person left, they probably didn't even know. They locked a door, or didn't. They fed the animals, or didn't. They turned at the ridge, looked back once, or didn't. But something stayed, some echo, some tether, some tiny kernel of unfinishedness. You run your hands over the stone beneath you, worn smooth, cold even in summer. Lichen traces the cracks in fractal patterns, like the earth itself has been writing letters no one's left to read. And then you remember a phrase, something found scrawled in a 16th century ledger, long after Wharram Percy had faded from the maps. The village that no longer speaks but still listens. It was likely a metaphor, poetic flourish. But now, here in the dark, it feels literal. You whisper into the night, "Did it hurt?" And though no voice answers, the wind stirs. Not enough to be eerie, just enough to agree. There's something else. You reach into your pocket and pull out the small metal button from earlier. It's warmer now, though not from your hand. Carries something, a trace of weight that has nothing to do with gravity. You place it on the stone beside you. A gift, an offering, a reminder that someone came back. Even if just to listen, you stay a while longer watching the stars emerge one by one. There's no rush. Wharram Percy has waited 5 centuries, can wait another hour. And as you sit there, you realize something that seems both tragic and strangely tender. The village never left. It just needed to be quiet for a very, very long time. You don't remember standing up. It's as if the village, sensing your thoughts had wandered too deep, gently lifted you back to your feet. Your legs move without planning, like they're following paths long buried under grass but still etched into the bones of the land. There's one place left to see tonight, not the grandest, not the most mysterious, but maybe the most telling. At the southeastern edge of Wharram Percy, past the collapsed cottages and half-erased hedgerows, lies a gentle slope where the ground feels just a little too smooth, too level. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it entirely. But this was once the site of the village mill. Not a grand structure, just a small post mill or perhaps a water mill. Debate still swirls about which. The records are murky. The archaeology is shy. But the presence of millstones and water channels suggests something important once turned here. You find the remnants easily. Just a few deep-set stones, a rusted iron ring, and what might have been the mill race, now dry and choked with roots. Here's the thing about mills. They were everything. They ground your grain. They marked your harvest. They measured your survival. And in medieval England, they were rarely private. A lord's mill meant the villagers had to use it and pay for the privilege. Even if you could grind your own grain at home with a hand quern, doing so could be illegal. Yes, illegal bread. Welcome to the past. You step into the footprint of the mill and imagine the sound. The creaking of the wheel, the slow thunder of turning gears, the steady chuff 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 of flour being born from stone. This is where the smell of fresh bread started. But more than that, the mill represented dependence. No matter how much barley you grew or how careful your baking was, the village still orbited the mill. When it stopped, life paused. And here's the strange detail, the one that sticks. One of the last entries in a nearby manor account mentions the mill standing idle in 1513. No accident, no storm, no fire, just quiet, like the wheel gave up turning because it had nothing left to grind. No grain, no hands to feed it, no reason to begin again. You stand there now, the silence so deep it hums, and try to imagine what the end felt like. Not the dramatic collapse, but the final nothing. One day, a miller's apprentice didn't show up. The next day, the grain bin stayed closed. And then no one came down the path. No sex, no shouting, no flour in the air, just the wind, and a wheel that spun for a while anyway, because it didn't know it was over yet. You sit beside one of the old stones, letting your fingers gather the fine, pale dust still settled in the cracks. It smells faintly of crushed grass and time, and something else, absence. The kind that isn't just a lack of people, but a lack of purpose. Wharram Percy didn't just lose its population, it lost its why. And once a place forgets why it exists, it becomes quiet. Then still. Then, like this, you lie back in the grass, arms stretched wide, the night wrapping around you like a thick blanket. Far above, stars blink behind fast-moving clouds, timid, unsure if they're allowed to witness what remains. And you think to yourself, how many villages just like this lie underfoot, unmarked and unnamed? How many stones whisper at night to no one at all? How many wheels stop spinning, not with fire or flood, but with indifference? Too many to count. But tonight, at least this one has a listener. And for Wharram Percy, maybe that's enough. You wake from your thoughts not with a start, but with the soft awareness that time has moved on without you. The sky is now velvet dark, moonless. The stars faint behind clouds. There's no sense of danger, no urgency, just that familiar hush, that village hush. You sit up slowly from the spot beside the old mill, brushing leaves from your back. The earth here is warm, oddly so, as if it remembers the weight of lives, of seasons turning, of hands tugging at ropes and grain sacks. You whisper a thank you to the stone behind you, not out of superstition, but out of instinct. Everything in Wharram Percy feels like it deserves to be spoken to gently. Now you walk, retracing your path through the fields. Only now the dark has erased the map. No more outlines, no more landmarks, just intuition. You're heading toward a strange, quiet space near the western slope. It's not marked, not fenced, not even listed in most surveys. But you saw it earlier. A low rise, ringed by a natural dip in the land. Locals used to call it the standstill. You don't know why. No records, no stories, just the name passed from mouth to mouth like a warning or a riddle. It's oddly symmetrical. A circle sunken at the edges, raised in the middle, no larger than a family garden. You step onto it expecting the same silence as before, but it's quieter here, in a different way, like the land is holding its breath. No wind, no night birds, not even the rustle of grass. You crouch at the center, pressing your palm to the dirt. Something happened here, something subtle, something final. They once found fragments of iron nails buried here, longer than usual, scorched at the tips, bent like lightning had kissed them. No building nearby, no known structure, just those nails. And stranger still, an odd concentration of buried glass beads. Red, green, and a deep cobalt blue. Not jewelry, not trade goods. They were burned, all in one spot. No one knows why. Historians speculate, of course they do. A failed ritual? A funerary offering? An attempt to protect the village from something it couldn't name? Or maybe it wasn't about fear. Maybe it was a farewell. Because if you stand very still, just as you are now, and you let the night grow long enough to press against your skin like linen, you can almost feel it. This was where the leaving happened. Not one at a time, not family by family, but everyone, together, standing right here. Maybe they gathered in silence. Maybe someone said words. Maybe the beads were scattered as a kind of spell. Or maybe they were thrown into a fire out of grief or spite or surrender. You sit down, legs crossed, and close your eyes. For a long time, nothing happens. And then you feel it. Not a sound, not a voice, but a weight just behind your shoulders. Not heavy, just enough. A reminder that someone was here, and someone left, and the ground noticed. You open your eyes and speak aloud, barely above a whisper. It's all right. I'm not staying, because that's the rule, isn't it? No one stays. Not really. Not for long. And still, they left the circle intact, even when everything else fell. You walk slowly away from the standstill, heart light and strange and full. You don't look back, not because you're afraid, but because some places are meant to remain in peripheral memory. Half seen, half felt, never quite real, like a dream you had once about a village, somewhere where time slowed to listen. You descend the gentle slope from the standstill, the grass brushing your calves, cool and damp. There's a new stillness in your body, as if some tension you didn't know you carried has been unwound, slowly, wordlessly, by the land itself. You're not sure what happened back there or if anything happened at all, but your steps feel different now. Quieter, as though you've stepped fully inside the rhythm of Wharram Percy. You follow the edge of an old stone boundary, barely visible, leading you toward the northern edge of the site. The air feels denser here, tinged with the smell of damp moss and something older. Chalk, maybe, clay, memory. The wind has gone still again, and you realize it's because you've entered a natural bowl, ringed by trees and shaded from the sky. This was once the workshop quarter, a place where people made things, fixed things, broke things in order to make better things. And what did they find here? A blacksmith's pit, lined with slag, a half-melted crucible, shards of worked bone and horn, traces of spinning, dyeing, tanning, tinkering. A village like Wharram Percy wasn't a museum of thatched roofs and cows. It was alive with labor. Your boot taps against something. You look down and find a broken iron awl, rusted and blunted, lodged in the mud, too worn to be useful, too stubborn to disappear. You crouch, letting your fingers hover over it, not touching. It might have been used to sew leather, or mend boots, or fasten a buckle for a child's satchel. And now it lies here centuries later, still shaped by the work it once performed. There's a kind of dignity in that. You stand and take a few slow steps toward the old tree at the center of the bowl. It's younger than the village, but not by much. Its trunk is thick and bent, its roots wide like fingers stretching to remember the foundations they grew over. You sit beneath it, spine against bark, and listen. This is where the heartbeat of the village once pulsed loudest. Not in the chapel or the Lord's house, but here, where tools were shaped, where wool was dyed, where pots were fired and mended. And it wasn't romantic. It was loud, sweaty, frustrating, filled with burns and splinters and shouting over fire. But it was necessary. These were the sounds of persistence. And yet the sound stopped. One day the forge didn't light. The tools went untouched. The last dye pot dried out and no one refilled it. And something very strange happened. People began to steal the silence. Decades after abandonment, when travelers passed by, they'd stop and scavenge. Not for gold, but for scraps of Wharram Percy's identity. A nail, tile, a piece of carved wood. One man in the 1700s even claimed to have taken an entire grindstone from the site, bragged about it, said it gave him good luck. He died in a house fire. Maybe coincidence. Maybe the village didn't appreciate being disassembled. Historians still argue. You lean back, eyes tracing the curve of the bowl overhead. How many hands worked here? How many hopes were hammered into blade edges, only to be dulled by time? And how many never left this place at all? Just dissolved into the soil like chalk into water. You rise again, brushing your palms clean. The old all glints faintly, catching the starlight like an eyelash. You leave it untouched, because sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is let a place keep its ghosts. And Wharram Percy has enough of them. You walk slowly, letting the trees close behind you, their branches whispering soft farewells in a language you almost understand. You find your way back toward the central spine of the village now, the line where all paths once converged. It's barely visible, just a slight dip in the land, flanked by stubborn thistles and quiet stones. But if you squint, if you let your eyes unfocus just enough, you can see it again. A road, worn smooth by hooves and heels, scattered with straw, lined with gossip. It doesn't look like much now. But once this was the lifeline, the track that linked houses to hearths, markets to mouths, worries to wells. You follow it with slow steps, your boots landing where hundreds, no thousands, once landed. And with every step, you feel the weight of the invisible village rising again, layer by layer. On your right, the skeletal walls of a cottage you passed earlier. On your left, a patch of wild nettles, where the village green once sprawled. You stop. It's hard to believe, looking at it now, but this open space, choked with brambles and hummocks, was once where people gathered to celebrate. The records say there were seasonal feasts here. Lammas, Candlemas, May Day, bonfires, Morris dancers, merrymaking, medieval style. Not the sanitized reenactments you see at fairs today, but real events. Messy, loud, full of joy and exhaustion. Imagine it. Someone strumming a rebec with 3 good strings. Children chasing a wooden hoop with shrieks so high they startled birds. Old women spitting cider with laughter. Someone, always someone, singing out of key. And all of it held in this field. This knot in the village's muscle. You move toward the center, where the ground dips just slightly, and sit on a flat stone that may once have been a bench, or a platform, or maybe just a place where someone tied up their dog and forgot to untie it. You notice something beneath the grass. A ring of worn cobblestones, half swallowed by time. A dance ring. They really did dance here, spinning in circles, clapping, shouting verses older than memory. And in the center, a maypole, not always, but on years when the barley came in strong and no one died too young that spring. It was decorated with rags, dried flowers, sometimes even coins. Not because they had extra, but because you give joy from the little you have. Even when you don't know if you'll have it tomorrow. You lie back in the grass, arms spread wide, and picture the last time it happened. Maybe it was a strange spring, too wet, too cold. The pole was smaller that year. No music, just humming. One of the dancers had already packed her cart to leave. But they danced anyway, because that's what you do when a place is dying. You pretend it isn't. You spin a little longer. Historians still debate how late the rituals continued here. Some say 1480, some say later. There's even a poem scratched into the flyleaf of a 16th century psalter, believed to reference Wharram Percy. Just 5 lines. Translated roughly, it reads, "The pole still stands where no feet tread. The grass grows through the dancing head. I sang alone, but none did hear. I left my coin, I left my beer. I hope the wind remembers me." You whisper it aloud, not because you believe in magic, but because some lines deserve to be heard again. And the wind does answer, soft and cool and kind, like it remembers the shape of music. You stand, slowly, letting your gaze sweep the green one last time. There are no dancers now, but you can feel the beat, still pulsing through the soil. Faint, but there. As if Wharram Percy has been waiting not to be rebuilt, but simply to be remembered. You step off the green slowly, reluctant to leave the echo of music behind. Even though your ears hear nothing, your body sways slightly, like it's still caught in the rhythm of a song long vanished. The path narrows now, pinched between what remains of 2 overgrown hedgerows. And ahead, shrouded in the low-hanging mist that's begun to rise from the valley floor, you spot your next destination. It's quiet here, more than quiet, expectant, because you're approaching what once was the village's most curious structure. One that didn't shelter people or animals or grain, but something stranger, stillness. You're headed toward the cold house. Now, let's not get too romantic. This wasn't an ice palace or a marble tomb. It was probably a pit house or a root cellar, stone-lined, tucked into the earth, designed to keep food cool, yes, but maybe also people. You arrive at a shallow depression, half collapsed, ringed with mossy stones. One side has fallen completely, but the other still holds. Inside, there's a damp chill even in summer. The temperature drops perceptibly the moment you step down. And you do step down, carefully. The stones are slick. Your breath becomes visible. The air smells of earth and iron, and something else. A dry sweetness, like aged wood or dried thyme left too long in a drawer. This place was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to preserve. Mostly food, yes, turnips, salted meat, whatever the seasons allowed. But there are stories, passed down like thorns wrapped in wool, of other things stored here. One local tale, written centuries later, speaks of a sleeping boy kept in the cold house during a particularly cruel summer. Not dead, not quite, sick perhaps, possessed, some said. His mother laid him in the stone cradle with a clove of garlic and 3 smooth stones on his chest. He did not wake. No one knows what happened to him. You crouch near the back of the chamber, where a carved niche is still faintly visible. Possibly a shelf. Possibly something more ceremonial. No one knows. The archaeologists scratched their heads, marked it down, moved on. But you notice something they missed. A tiny handprint, faint, fused into the stone with what looks like ash. It's not alarming, not ghostly, just small, like someone wanted to leave a reminder that they were here, that they touched this cold. You press your own palm beside it. Perfect fit. Or maybe that's your imagination. You sit down, back against the cold wall, and exhale slowly. Feels like a kind of pause. A comma in the village's sentence. Not the end, just a breath. Because cold houses weren't just for survival. They were for timing, preserving things until the right moment, until hunger demanded, or celebration called, or memory needed to be served. You wonder what else might be waiting in the cold. Not food, but stories. Things that couldn't be told until the warmth was gone. Things that needed silence. Things that waited for someone like you to come sit in the dark and listen. You stay a while longer, long enough for the stones to accept you, long enough for the mist to curl its fingers through the doorway. And then you rise, stepping out into the night again. The cold clings to you as you walk, like a shawl stitched from old hours. And as the grass crunches faintly beneath your boots, you realize some parts of this village weren't meant to live forever. They were meant to linger. The mist follows you as you leave the cold house, curling around your ankles like a curious cat. It doesn't feel menacing, just watchful, as if the night itself wants to know where you'll go next. And you're not entirely sure. The landscape shifts under the moonless sky, turning familiar contours into unfamiliar shapes. But your feet seem to know before you do, and soon you're standing before something that doesn't look like much at all. A shallow dip in the earth, no more than a trench. Part of it has caved in. Roots poke out from one side. Grass spills over the edges like a bad haircut. But this used to be the village well, or at least one of them. You can barely make out the stone lining, worn and partially sunken. But there it is, unmistakable, sinking into the ground like a mouth that's forgotten how to speak. And suddenly, everything around you is quieter. Even your thoughts. Wells have that effect, don't they? They aren't just holes in the ground. They're thresholds between life and death, need and plenty, surface and deep. You step closer and peer in. Nothing reflects back, just blackness. A pure, solid dark that doesn't shimmer or blink. It swallows your gaze like it's been waiting. It's hard to imagine now, but this was once where the village gathered each morning. Before meals, before gossip, before prayers. Buckets creaked, ropes frayed, hands chilled. A queue of neighbors, each with their own silence, their own hopes. And more than once, especially in drought, arguments. Water wasn't always friendly, and neither were people. One record notes a fight that broke out here in the summer of 1376. Two women, both widows, both trying to fill their jugs first. One of them struck the other with a ladle. The wound became infected. She died a week later, and the surviving woman, she was made to clean the well every day for a year. Even in winter, even when the rope froze, she was eventually found collapsed beside it. Her hands blistered, her mouth dry. Sometimes survival has a cruel sense of irony. You kneel beside the well and rest your palm lightly on the rim. It's damp, slick with dew. You wonder how many hands have done the same thing, thousands probably. And none of them could have imagined that this place would someday go dry. Not just the water, the purpose, because that's what truly kills a place like this. Not fire, not war, not plague, but the slow, quiet evaporation of purpose. No more buckets, no more voices, just this open wound in the earth, waiting for something that will never come back. And yet here you are, maybe not with a bucket, but with a kind of attention. And the well notices. You lean forward slightly, speak down into the darkness. I see you. There's no echo, only that deep velvet silence. But it feels warmer now, a little less lonely. You sit beside the well for a while, arms resting on your knees, letting your thoughts sink slowly downward, like stones without splash. And somewhere in your mind, you imagine the last time someone drew water here. Maybe they knew it would be the last. Maybe they whispered a thank you to the dark, the way you'd thank a friend you were never going to see again. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't the last after all. Because tonight, in the stillest hour, the well has a listener. And sometimes that's enough to wake a memory, even one buried this deep. You rise slowly from the well's edge, knees crackling like old parchment. The cold has settled into your joints now, not sharp, but deep, like something permanent. It's the kind of cold that doesn't want to leave, the kind that says, you've stayed long enough, but you're not done yet. Your body turns east, as if nudged, and your feet obey without asking why. The mist is heavier now, drifting in thick, slow waves across the grass. But the stars above begin to blink back into view, clearer than before, as if the night itself is listening. You follow a narrow trail that barely exists anymore. It twists between patches of stubborn bramble and old, half-visible fence posts. Then, at last, the path opens. And there it is, the sheep field. It's just a slope, really. But once, this was where most of the village's wealth walked on four legs. Wool was the lifeblood of medieval England. It wasn't just cloth, it was currency. It bought walls, bought favors, bought absolution. And Wharram Percy, like many villages, was eventually undone by it. You sit on a rock near the edge of the field, arms wrapped around your knees, and listen. It's quiet now, just wind brushing through grass like distant applause. But 500 years ago, this field would have been alive. Sheep bleating, boys shouting, dogs barking, the constant crunch of hooves and grass and dung underfoot. And not just sound, but color. Wool dyed with madder root. Striped ribbons marking ownership. 1,000 pale eyes watching, chewing, existing. The villagers didn't own the sheep, though not at the end. The lords did. That's the part most forget. Wharram Percy didn't die because its soil failed or its people starved. It died because its value changed. People were pushed out to make room for sheep. Because wool made money. And people, they made problems. And the transformation wasn't subtle. It was brutal. Evictions, fires, crops left to rot. Entire families packed into carts with nothing but cooking pots and rosaries. One record mentions a woman who returned to the village 2 years after being removed. She tried to sleep in the ruins of her own house. The Lord's men found her and chased her off with dogs. She left behind a wooden spoon. They found it years later, still whole, still stained with ash. Historians still argue whether the Lords acted out of greed or necessity. But here, sitting in the ghost of the sheep field, it's hard not to see it clearly. This wasn't abandonment. It was erasure. You stand and wander into the middle of the field, letting the long grass slap against your shins. And you imagine what it must have felt like for the last villager to look out and see sheep where people once stood. No laughter, no smoke from hearths, no dancing on the green, just animals, silent, profitable, indifferent. You stop walking, standing perfectly still. The mist pools around your boots. The wind dies again. And for just a moment, just a heartbeat, you hear it, not a voice, not a word, but a kind of echo, like hooves, like breath, like something that used to be here still passing through, invisible but certain. You close your eyes and let it move around you. Then it's gone, and the field is empty again. But you're not. You leave the field without turning back, the grass parting like a curtain behind you, because now you understand. Wharram Percy didn't simply vanish. It was repurposed. And what was once a village became a commodity. But tonight it becomes a story again. You walk slowly now, not out of fatigue but reverence. The ground beneath you feels different, lighter, somehow, as if each step matters more, as if the land has accepted you not as a visitor, but as someone willing to remember. Ahead looms the silhouette of the church, the most intact structure left in Wharram Percy. Its broken tower rises like a crooked tooth against the night sky, stone ribs still defiant after centuries of silence. The nave is roofless, the walls pockmarked by time, but it stands. Somehow it stands. You cross what used to be the path of the lich gate. Your boots crunch faintly over the gravel and earth. You pause as you step into the boundary of what was once hallowed ground. Everything here feels sharper, colder, cleaner. Even the air has changed, as though it has been filtered through centuries of prayer and decay. The nave yawns open in front of you, flanked by skeletal walls and empty window frames that now only hold stars. You sit slowly on the edge of what used to be a pew stone, one of the few left, and for a while you say nothing. You listen to absence, to echoes, to the kind of silence that remembers hymns. Because this wasn't just a place of worship. It was a clock ticking through people's lives, baptisms, marriages, confessions, funerals. From cradle to grave, it was all here. In fact, some of the bodies are still here, beneath you, buried in layers. The archaeological digs found them, over 700 human skeletons, cradled in the soil like secrets too heavy to scatter. Men, women, children, some with clear causes of death, others mysteries. One child, buried with a stone in each hand. One woman, spine twisted unnaturally, likely scoliosis, but positioned with care. And one man with a healed leg fracture, so severe he must have walked with a limp for decades. They were buried with tenderness, even when the world outside the church crumbled. You tilt your head back and look at the stars framed by the broken tower above. You wonder what the last sermon was like, the last gathering. Maybe the priest's voice cracked, maybe the villagers wept, or maybe it ended with the same words every Sunday did, because routine is easier than grief. Go in peace. You walk slowly to the chancel where the altar once stood. The base is still there, lopsided, mossy, half swallowed by weeds. You place your hand on it, not out of piety, but because something in you needs to connect. And that's when you notice it, etched into the far wall, so faint it's almost invisible in the low light. A graffito, not a prayer, not a saint's name, just 5 words, carved by a hand that shook, or maybe just didn't care about being neat. Still here, still here, still. No date, no initials, but it's enough. You kneel there for a while, hands resting on your thighs, and let the quiet fill you. You don't need to believe in anything. Not gods, not ghosts, just people. People who lived, who loved, who lost, who left this behind, not perfectly but meaningfully. And it strikes you, this church didn't survive because of stone. It survived because of grief, and maybe even hope, because someone, long after the bells stopped ringing, still came here, still scratched those words into the wall, still believed that being remembered mattered. You rise and back out of the church slowly, facing it the whole time, not because you fear it, but because it deserves a proper goodbye. You step backward from the ruined church, your feet meeting the uneven ground of the graveyard beyond. The grass is taller here, left untended for centuries, waving gently in the breeze like it's trying to keep the dead warm. You're surrounded now not by fear, but by company. Stone markers lean at odd angles, half swallowed by time, their inscriptions long since rubbed smooth by wind and rain. Some are just nubs, barely visible mounds, remembered only by the way the earth curves. But there's a dignity here, a refusal to vanish, and you begin to move slowly among them, as if walking through a crowded room of people who haven't spoken in 500 years but might start any minute. This was the final chapter of the village. Not its destruction, but its persistence. Because even after the houses fell, and the sheep took over, and the doors were shut for the last time, this place kept burying its dead. Yes, long after life drained away, death kept coming home. The graveyard at Wharram Percy was used until the early 1500s and maybe, just maybe, a bit beyond. Some believe the last burial here was in 1525. A woman, name unknown, age middle, cause of death unknown. She was wrapped in a wool shroud, not a coffin, placed gently, not dumped, and she was the last one. After her, the silence deepened, but death still marked the earth. They found bones here with traces of healing, evidence that people had lived hard, painful lives but kept going. A man with a shattered collarbone that had fused wrong. A woman with no teeth at all, but signs that she'd been fed soft food until the very end. Someone had taken care of her. And here's the strangest thing. In the last few excavated burials, coins were found placed beside the skull. Not in the mouth, not in the hands, beside the head, like an offering, or maybe a reminder that worth is something we carry even into silence. Historians still argue over the symbolism. Was it pagan holdover? Christian misinterpretation? A personal tradition of grief? No one agrees, but you don't need to, because standing here, surrounded by these tilted stones and invisible names, it feels obvious. Wharram Percy didn't just vanish. It left instructions, not in words, but in soil, in bones, in the care taken long after the village had no future. You find a spot beneath a skeletal tree at the edge of the graveyard and sit, cross-legged, the way you might at a campfire. And you whisper, "Tell me something before I sleep." And though nothing answers aloud, the wind shifts, the grass hushes, and you feel it settling, as if the village, so long misremembered as merely abandoned, has decided to trust you with more. Not because you're special, but because you listened. And that's all Wharram Percy ever really wanted. Not to be rebuilt, not to be mourned, just witnessed. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe in the cool, faintly mossy air. You don't dream yet, but you're close. You don't know how long you've been sitting under that skeletal tree. Minutes? Hours? Time slips differently here, softened by the hush of forgotten footsteps and the slow breathing of the land. Eventually, your legs stir, and you rise, not from restlessness, but from instinct. There's still one place pulling at you, faint but insistent, not dramatic, not sacred, but strangely intimate. You begin walking again, leaving the church ruins and the graveyard behind, cutting diagonally across a patch of uneven ground. You're no longer navigating by paths. You're following impressions, the subtle tilt of the land, the way the wind moves, the rhythm beneath your feet. And then, there it is, a slight rise, a shallow dip, a few scattered stones. This was the hearth house. That's what archaeologists call it. Anyway, not a grand hall or communal oven, just a simple stone structure with a hearth at its center. One of the last to be used before the village was emptied. A place for warmth, for soup, for stories. You step carefully over the low boundary wall, really just a suggestion of one now, and stand in what was once a kitchen. And you feel it immediately. This is where the ordinary happened, where hands moved without thought, where soup boiled too long, where someone once muttered about the weather and tore bread with slightly dirty fingers, where babies cried and someone sang a flat lullaby to shush them. You kneel beside the sunken hearth, now choked with weeds, but you can still see the soot stains in the stone, centuries old, but still there, still black, and you realize this is what made Wharram Percy a village. Not the church, not the mill, not the sheep, this fire, food, the everyday effort of staying alive. You run your fingers over the edge of the hearth, half expecting it to be warm. It isn't, of course, but there's something in the texture, a kind of residue that feels like it remembers touch. They found pottery shards here, bits of cooking pots, a broken bowl with a green glaze, a rusted iron spoon with a worn groove in the handle, worn not by time, but by fingers, over and over again. And here's the strange part, my favorite, really. They also found a tooth, just one, human, embedded in the hearth ash. Maybe it fell out during a meal. Maybe it was lost during a story. Maybe someone laughed too hard and coughed, and there it went. Whatever the cause, it stayed. It burned. It became part of the hearth. Historians still debate whether it was an accident or an offering. But that's the beauty of this place. You don't need answers to feel the truth of it. You lie down gently beside the hearth, letting the chill stones press against your side. And you imagine the flicker of firelight, the sound of wooden bowls being scraped clean, the lazy crackle of wet logs trying to catch. A child yawns. A man curses under his breath. Someone somewhere hums a tune with no name. And just like that, the house breathes again. Only for a moment. Only because you let it. Then it's quiet once more. But not hollow. You sit up, brush dirt from your sleeve, and whisper something into the cold ashes. Thanks for dinner. You're not sure why, but it feels right. And as you stand to leave, you realize you didn't come here to tour ruins. You came here to sit where others sat and feel what they felt and maybe, just maybe, carry a sliver of them forward. And so you do, step by step, out of the hearth house, with a bit of warmth still clinging to your chest. You emerge from the hearth house slowly, as though waking from a memory that wasn't entirely your own. The night feels different now, richer somehow. The air has weight, like breath held in a quiet room. No more wind, no more mist, just stillness and your footsteps pressing gently into the past. You start down a slope you hadn't noticed before, a path mostly swallowed by time. It curves gently eastward, toward what used to be the terraced fields. And this is where the land begins to speak back. Not in words, not in voices, but in shapes. You pause at the top of the hill and look down. The grass is thicker here, but the patterns remain. Long, rippled furrows etched into the hillside like scars. They look natural until they don't. Until you realize they were made by human hands, over and over, century after century. This was agriculture before machinery, before GPS farming, before even the notion of private property as we know it. These ridges, ridge and furrow they're called, were the backbone of survival. You walk along one now, your boots rising and falling in gentle rhythm. Down, down, like waves on green water, and you start to feel it, the effort. Each furrow here is a decision, to plant, to till, to try again, despite blight or flood or boredom or the aching certainty that your work would never quite be enough. This field once fed dozens, maybe more, and it wasn't easy. The soil was thin, chalky, demanding. Crops failed often, especially in wet years. One chronicle from 1316 records a particularly harsh season, where barley sprouted with a bitter head and cows gave milk the color of dust. People starved that year, and yet the fields were planted again the next spring. Because what else could they do? Historians still debate whether Wharram Percy's lands were ever truly fertile, or whether the villagers simply refused to give up. You stop walking and crouch by a small dip in the furrow, and there, half buried, is a fragment of ceramic, glazed green like moss caught in glass. You don't pick it up. You don't need to, because it tells you everything. Someone was here. Someone worked this land. Someone bent over this soil and dropped a piece of their world, by accident or design, and never came back for it. And you're standing in the very line of their labor, not above it, not after it, inside it. You move on, tracing the pattern like a song you don't quite remember but still hum instinctively. And then, at the far end of the field, you find something unexpected. A low wall, almost nothing, maybe 4 stones still in place. But this wasn't a house. It was a bee shelter. They've found them before. Small recesses built into boundary walls. Clay pots, hollows. Medieval beekeepers would place skeps, straw hives, along these warm southern walls to coax out sweetness from the landscape. And Wharram Percy, even in its poverty, still knew sweetness. Honey wasn't a treat. It was medicine, preservative, prayer offering, wound dressing, and maybe, on rare days, dessert. You crouch again, this time near the wall, and imagine the low hum of bees. Not swarming, not dangerous, just present. Working, like everyone else. It's a gentle thought, somehow, that even as people fought famine and lords and each other, something soft still thrived here. You lean your head back and exhale. The stars above are impossibly still. The village sleeps all around you, and you realize Wharram Percy wasn't a tragedy. It was a life made from thousands of tiny ones, some loud, some fleeting, some slow as bees in sunlight. And though the harvests are gone, and the hands that built these furrows turned to dust centuries ago, the shape of their work remains. So you walk one last length of the field in silence, each footstep a thank you. And when you reach the end, you don't look back. Not because you've forgotten, but because you remember. The ridge and furrow fields slowly flatten behind you as you reach a narrow track, barely there, worn smooth by time and memory. Your steps now are softer, not from exhaustion, but reverence. You're approaching what might be the most invisible part of Wharram Percy, the part that no maps marked, no documents detailed, no lord tallied in his records, and yet it might have been the most important place of all. You're walking toward the edges, not a building, not a road, not even a wall, just the threshold between the known and the forgotten. Every village has one, the place where the houses ended and the wild began, where chores were finished and thoughts got weird, a copse of trees to the north, a brook that no longer sings, a clearing where no one quite remembers what happened. And here, in Wharram Percy, it was a small dip in the ground, just past the last cottage. Half marsh, half meadow. They called it the Hollow. Not officially. That name never appears in records, but whispers from the 18th century, long after the village was gone, speak of a place where the grass grew differently and where people left things they didn't want to keep, but couldn't throw away. You arrive just as a faint mist begins to lift, revealing the dip. Still there, still quiet. The grass is darker here, softer underfoot. You kneel instinctively. No ruins, no tools, no hearth, but you feel it, the strange pull of liminality. This was the place of unspoken things, where a girl might come to bury her broken comb, where someone might whisper the name of a lost love to the moss and never tell a soul, where children dared each other to spend the night, and sometimes someone did. The Hollow was where stories leaked, superstitions, half-prayers, little fears wrapped in string and buried in jars. Some archaeologists, skeptical and tired, once dug here. What did they find? Charcoal, burned cloth, a chicken bone wrapped in wool. No one knew what to make of it. But you don't need proof to feel the truth. You lower yourself into the dip and sit cross-legged in the quiet. This wasn't a sacred place, but it was a private one. The kind of privacy that comes only from being just far enough away. From eyes, from rules, from reason. Historians still debate whether the Hollow was a dumping ground or a place of ritual. They argue about fertility charms, folk magic, seasonal rites that left no scripture, only smoke. But sitting here, breathing the damp air, you know what it really was? It was the village's emotional attic, where things went not to die, but to settle, to lose their sharpness, to become bearable. You reach into the earth with one hand, not to dig, but to feel the temperature just below the surface. It's warm, not geothermal, just held, like the soil remembers, like the Hollow gathered everything and kept it safe. Shame, grief, desire, hope, all of it composted gently into something softer. You close your eyes, and for a brief moment you imagine them. All the villagers who once stood where you're sitting now. A woman chewing her lip and burying a bit of cloth she shouldn't have owned. A child leaving behind a doll with one eye. A man, silent, his hands shaking, not ready to say goodbye to someone, but needing to. You exhale slowly. The hollow listens. You stand, brush the dirt from your palms, and step out of the dip like climbing out of a bath you didn't know you needed. And as you turn to leave, you glance back just once. Not to check, but to thank. Because every village needs its quiet place to hide what cannot be explained. And Wharram Percy, even in ruin, still keeps its secrets gently. You don't walk now. You drift. The hollow stays behind like a sigh you haven't quite finished. And ahead, only one more place calls to you. Not loudly, but persistently. A final whisper in the fabric of this sleeping village. You follow it almost dreamlike, passing over patches of ground you've already walked. Yet they feel different now, like the village is gently folding you inward. At the very southern edge of Wharram Percy, near where the slope falls away into deeper woods, you arrive at what used to be a trackway. The ancient road that once brought people in and out of this place. It's overgrown now, of course. Narrow, forgotten. Even on maps, it's barely a suggestion. But you recognize it by the curve, the way the earth dips and flattens, the faint imprint of wheels and hooves from hundreds of years ago. You've reached the village edge, the exit, and if we're being honest, maybe also the doorway out of time. You sit down on a stone near where the path begins its descent toward the valley. It's the kind of place where people would have paused, to rest, to say goodbye, to look back. And so you do. You look back. From here, even in darkness, you can see the outline of it all. The tilted church tower, barely rising from the grass. The gentle swell of the sheep field. The lines of ancient furrows catching just enough starlight to be seen. It's not grand, not haunting, just true and quiet, because this is the part of the story most people forget. That places don't end all at once. They fade. Wharram Percy didn't burn. It wasn't swallowed by plague or swallowed by sea. It simply became unnecessary. The wool trade shifted. The lords changed hands. The fields emptied. And eventually no one came back, except the bones. And the archaeologists. And tonight you sit with that truth for a while, letting it settle across your shoulders like a well-worn blanket. And then, somewhere in the distance, a breeze picks up, soft, almost musical. And in it, maybe imagined, maybe not, you hear something like laughter, tools clinking, the thunk of bread dough hitting wood, a dog's bark, a prayer whispered too fast to be understood. Just fragments, but enough. Enough to know that Wharram Percy never truly died. It just changed frequency. Now it exists in the in-between, in the earth and the silence, in the bones and the brickwork, in the misremembered names and the lines in the grass. You rise one last time, step into the center of the old path, and face forward. The road continues, into woods, into fog, into now. But before you take that step, you whisper, not for anyone in particular, not expecting an answer. I won't forget you. The leaves shift gently like they heard. The stone under your foot feels solid. The path opens before you, and the village stays behind, but not alone, not anymore. The trackway wins ahead of you now, part shadow, part memory. You follow it not out of need, but out of rhythm, because some part of you knows the story isn't finished. Not quite. The village may have faded behind you, but something lingers in the dark, not ghostly, not dramatic, just unresolved. You descend gently along the old path, and the ground becomes softer underfoot, springier, mossy. The air thickens slightly with moisture, and you realize you're nearing the spring. Yes, Wharram Percy had a water source beyond the well. Tucked into the hillside, at the edge of its world, flowed a natural spring, now barely more than a trickle. But once this was life itself, more dependable than the church, more comforting than any lord. You follow the trail until you hear it, faint, rhythmic, like breathing through stone. Then you see it, still there, still flowing. The water slides down over a shelf of green slick rock, collecting in a shallow basin that was carved, by time or by hands, who knows. It's clear, so clear, and even in the dark, it glows just slightly, like it remembers the sun. You crouch beside it, watching your reflection ripple gently in the pool. And then you do something strange, something ancient. You reach into your pocket, just instinct, not thought, and place a small stone on the edge of the spring. An offering, a memory, you don't know, but people did this for centuries. Coins, stones, pins, little things they hoped might balance the scale, even if just a bit. Historians still debate whether these gestures were superstitions or proto-religion, or simply the human need to say, I was here. You let your fingers dip into the water. It's cold, not cruel, but present. You splash a bit onto your face. The chill startles you not because of the temperature, but because of what it washes away. Some of the heaviness in your chest, the long breath you didn't realize you were holding, the ache of carrying so many stories on your shoulders. For a moment, it's just you and the spring, and that's enough. You sit beside it for a long time, watching the water flow, never rushing, never stopping, just continuing like the memory of the village itself. And when you finally rise, you leave the stone behind, not as a gift, not as a prayer, but as proof that someone came back, that someone listened, and that, in the quiet night, this forgotten spring was seen once more. You leave the spring behind, not as a stranger, but as someone who's touched the breath of the place. The path beneath your feet feels less like ground now, more like memory made solid, gathered gently beneath your soles with each step you take. And you walk slowly, not because you're tired, but because you know you're approaching the edge of the story. And endings, if treated carefully, can feel like beginnings in disguise. Ahead, the land softens. Hills round into curves like the folds of a blanket. The wind no longer tugs, it wraps. And through this dim, almost weightless silence, you spot it. Collapsed cottage, or what remains of one. Just 4 stumps of wall, like teeth worn down to the gum line. A chimney breast rising oddly intact, proud and fragile at once. The floor is gone. The roof vanished. But it still feels occupied, not by people, but by everything they once left behind. You step through what was once the doorway, and immediately, the air changes. It's warmer here, calmer. You sit gently on a chunk of limestone that might have been a hearth bench, or a windowsill, or just the right place to rest after a day of carrying too many buckets. And you breathe, slow, even, present. This house was never mentioned in records. No names are attached, no tales of grandeur or scandal. But the archaeologists found a thimble here, 2 fish bones, a bead of red glass, small things, quiet things, and in that smallness lies something enormous. Continuity. You place your hand on the chimney stone, and it's still warm from the day's sun, or maybe just warm from memory. Either way, it holds you for a moment. And here, just here, you find something surprising. Scratched faintly into the inside of the chimney. LA 1483. No one knows who that was. A girl? A mason? A last resident? The initials are common. The date is strange. But it doesn't matter, because someone wanted it to stay. Someone wanted to leave a fingerprint in stone. And tonight you touch it. And tonight it's remembered. The roof may be gone, but for now you are its ceiling. The floor may be dust, but your presence grounds it. And the silence may be deep, but it is not empty. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes just a moment longer this time, letting Wharram Percy settle around you like dusk itself. You don't stand up this time. You just shift slightly, adjust your weight, sink deeper into the curve of stone, as if the earth is molding itself gently around your form. There's no rush anymore, no destination left to reach, only the unraveling of memory. The collapsed cottage fades behind you as you let your body move, almost dreamlike, down a shallow slope toward the pond. It's barely marked on any modern map, too small, too seasonal. But the villagers called it the mere, and it once meant everything. Not just for water, but for reflection. The kind of place you wander to alone, and not always on purpose. You reach it now, a dark, still sheet of water, nestled in a fold of land like a secret cradled in a palm. It doesn't shimmer, it doesn't ripple, simply waits. You sit on its edge, legs pulled up, arms folded around your knees. And you look. No frogs tonight, no birds, not even bugs, just the pond. And you stare into it for a long time until the reflection becomes less your face and more something else entirely. Not ghosts, not visions, just possibility. You imagine one of the last villagers doing the same, kneeling here, washing a shirt, or a cut, or a bowl, not thinking of legacy or ruin, just the moment, the water, the wind, the breath between tasks. Historians still argue about the final years of Wharram Percy, whether people left peacefully or were forced, whether they scattered or regrouped elsewhere. But none of that matters here, because in this water you can see that whatever they lost, whatever they couldn't carry, they left something behind. And it wasn't pain, it was quiet. You trail your fingers in the pond. The water is perfectly still and perfectly cold. It doesn't resist you, doesn't pull. It just holds your presence for a moment before releasing it with a whisper. You lie back on the grass beside it. The sky above you glows faintly, stars smudged like thumbprints on black velvet. You can't even name them, but you don't need to. You're not here to understand. You're here to feel. And in this moment, with the village all around you, not loud, not active, just resting, you begin to feel yourself blurring slightly, as though your outline is softening, as though you're becoming part of the place, just as much as the stones and the spring and the soot. Your eyes flutter closed. You don't fall asleep yet, but it's close now, very close. You lie still beside the mirror, listening to the not-quite silence. It isn't empty, this quiet, it has texture, depth, like the hush of a theater just before the curtain rises, or just after it falls. A breath held, and then released. Somewhere behind you, a breeze rustles the grass. Not sharply, not insistently, just enough to remind you the world hasn't stopped turning. You shift slightly, not to get up, no, not now, just enough to feel the soft earth beneath your palm, the little indentations made by roots, the cool dampness hugging the undersides of stones. And in that small contact, you feel it again. This village is not gone. It simply changed shape. It left the shape of houses and fields and fires, and took the shape of remembrance. You're part of that shape now, and you begin to wonder, without fear, what remains of us when the things we built disappear. Is it bones? Maybe. Stories? Hopefully. But maybe, too, it's the little things, the crease in a stone where a hand always leaned, the path worn down by bare feet, even long after the feet are gone, the slight sag in a cottage wall that once made someone laugh and say, "We'll fix that next year." But they never did. Historians still debate what kind of people lived here. Were they independent, oppressed, faithful, superstitious? The answer, as it often is all of the above. And maybe none of it, because people don't live as categories. They live as moments, little ones, like the mother who tore a piece of her apron to tie her child's shoe, or the old man who hummed a song only he remembered while stirring a pot that didn't quite boil, or the boy who left his wooden toy on the hillside, distracted by something better, and never picked it up again. They're still here. You feel them not as shadows, but as warmth, low and steady, like coals that never fully died out. You rest your head on the grass now. The damp doesn't bother you. The breeze feels kind. And everything is finally still. You're not leaving Wharram Percy. You're resting with it. And in a moment you'll sleep. But first, one last breath. One last step into that soft, final fade. You don't open your eyes. You don't need to. The village has faded into you now. Not as a place you visited, but as a place you carried all along. The silence has settled behind your ribs. Its wind curls gently through your thoughts, and its earth, cool and quiet beneath your back, holds you like a memory too soft to speak aloud. The stars above blur slightly, or maybe your thoughts do. Doesn't matter. Everything sharp has rounded. Everything loud has dimmed. Your breaths grow longer now, slower, each inhale like drawing in mist, each exhale like laying down a stone. The grass around you rustles, not in warning, but in rhythm. A hush, a hum, a kind of old lullaby hummed without words. The kind people sing when they think no one's listening. The kind that says, "You're safe now," and you are. Because here, in this long-forgotten valley, nothing is asked of you. No tasks, no decisions, just presence, just being. Even the ruins seem to soften in the dark, their jagged edges blurred by time and moonlight. Not broken, just sleeping, like you will be. Soon, you pull your hands up near your chest, the way children do, the way animals do, the way we all do, when there's nothing left to carry but breath. You could think more. You could turn over one last thought about history, or memory, or what it means to leave a mark. But you don't, because the village has answered everything it needed to. And so you let go. The night folds around you like a thick wool cloak. The soil beneath you exhales, and you begin to drift, through moss, through time, through the low lull of a world that no longer asks for anything except rest. So rest now. There's nothing left to see. You've seen it all. Nothing left to feel. You've felt it. No more footsteps. No more remembering. Just the slow, gentle falling into sleep.